Hey guys, and welcome to Parents Night. We're so happy to be investing this time with you today. We are in week 4 of a series that we're calling Make Sense. In this series, we're exploring the question, does how we're living really make sense? And we're looking at this through the lens of parenting and raising the rising generations. Last time we talked about learning to speak our kids' language, and I have to say I really enjoyed last week's conversation. It was a good time.
This week we are exploring every parent's favorite topic, and that's discipline. We'll be looking at this in the light of our last talk, speaking our kids' language.
But before we get too deep into this, we feel it's important to address the fact that discipline is not a dirty word. Now, you may disagree at this point because when most people think about discipline, they think about getting in trouble. And you may be sitting there having a flashback to when you were a kid and, maybe you got spanked for disobeying, or you got put into a timeout, or maybe you lost privileges, or you got sent to bed without a meal. There was punishment for behavior that your parents felt was, not awesome, that they disapproved of. Now, we want to point out that while punishment can be a form of discipline, discipline itself is not merely punishment. You see, discipline at its root means to train.
Last time we talked about how as parents, one of our greatest goals is to raise healthy kids. Emotionally, physically, relationally, and spiritually healthy kids. A critical part of this is healthy training. As parents, we are engaged in a journey with our kids as they move from infancy to adulthood. One of our main jobs is to train them to one day reach a healthy level of maturity that will allow them to function as a responsible adult in society. And this training is focused more than just their actions, but on their mind and hearts as well. This training comes from the form of modeling it ourselves, verbal instructions and requests, teaching and praising the right behavior, correcting the wrong behavior, providing learning experiences, and much more. As we mentioned earlier, punishment is a form of discipline, and it does have its place, but in many homes, punishment is greatly overused. Punishment is a form of discipline, but as Gary mentioned in his book, in the 5 love languages of children, it is the most negative one.
There's a flip side to this as well, because many parents feel that discipline is punishment, and so they pull away from the idea of discipline because they don't want to negatively affect their children, which seems logical. Unfortunately, good intentions in this area often lead to negative outcomes with these children. That's because children need structure, they need rules, they need discipline in order to develop well. You see, kids actually crave it, and when they don't have it, they push boundaries looking for it. They look for their limits because, believe it or not, kids feel safe and secure when they know their limits. Healthy discipline teaches kids all kinds of wonderful things, like problem-solving skills, impulse control, self-regulation skills. It teaches them to take responsibility for their own actions, and it encourages good choices. Healthy discipline is critical for the raising and the development of healthy kids. And here's the thing, as good parents, we love our kids. And love is often displayed by looking out for the interests of others, and in this case, our kids. A neat thing is that healthy discipline does the same thing. And in this, we see that discipline itself is an expression of love. Although at times it doesn't always feel like it. Now, we even see this principle in God's word. Hebrews 12:6 says, "For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastises every son whom he receives." We've said it here before, but rules without relationship leads to rebellion. Gary points out that love wards off resentment, hostility, and obstructive passive-aggressive behaviors that can be associated with discipline.
Healthy discipline starts with making our children feel loved, that they have their love tanks full. We do this best by speaking their primary love language. So discipline is important, and it is best received by our children when they feel loved. Gary points out in his book, the main cause for misbehavior in children is often a low or empty love tank. On Saturday, we were watching a movie with the family called Christmas Chronicles 2. Fun movie. At the end of the movie, we saw this concept on full display. Without any spoilers, I'll just say that a major theme of the movie was based around someone who felt like they weren't getting the love that they needed, and it caused them to do terrible things. They were looking for love but didn't know how to express it well. Funny thing was, this character was loved, but they weren't receiving it in the way they needed or could understand it. When it comes to our children, they aren't all that different. They are kids, and they don't know how to articulate their need for love in the way that healthy adults do. And let's be honest, many adults don't know how to articulate their need for love in a healthy manner either. And so our kids, when they feel desperate enough, they will act out, and their behavior turns inappropriate. And in these moments, they test their parents' love. It's like they're asking, do you love me? As parents, we may not like their behavior, but how we respond to them in those times matter.
Now, often when a child misbehaves, we ask ourselves, what do I need to do to correct that behavior? And for so many, the go-to solution is punishment. So that child knows not to do that again. But we should be asking, what does my child need right now? When we ask, what does my child need, we can then thoughtfully make a plan to address their needs. And when the need is met, then we can deal with the corrective actions that are needed. Mm-hmm. When a child feels loved and has their needs met, then they will receive the discipline far better than if they had an empty love tank. Now, a side point on this, misbehavior cannot go unchecked. It cannot be condoned or excused. But how we deal with misbehavior, it really matters. Now, speaking of dealing with our children's behavior, we've talked a little bit about punishment, but what are the other ways to discipline our children in a healthy manner? Well, here's the thing. There's no end to the amount of content that you can research about healthy discipline. And I want to encourage you as parents, look into these. Do some research for yourselves and find out what works best for you and for your family. But for now, we're going to take a quick look at a few of the ideas that Gary points out in the 5 love languages of children, which, I highly recommend that every parent gets this book and reads it. There's a lot of great stuff in there. But before we jump into that, I also want to encourage all parents to really evaluate how you discipline. Remember that we want to train our kids, but this involves more than just their actions. We want to train their hearts, and we want to train their minds as well. If all we ever do is deal with their actions, they may do the right thing when we're around, but when they're away from us and away from prying eyes, things may be very different. Mm-hmm. You may know this, you may not, but I work with teenagers, and I've seen them behave this way all the time. I've seen them behave in ways that they never would have if their parents were around. This is on full display all the time. And so I want to encourage you to make sure that when you're disciplining your kids, you don't just deal with their actions. Make sure that you're also training their hearts and minds. Now, with that said, here's some of the ideas laid out by Gary, and we're just gonna touch on these really briefly.
Number 1, make requests.
Now, this is a positive method, and it puts responsibility into your child's hands. It's far more pleasant method than number 2, and the beautiful part of this is it's more conversational than it is confrontational. So you make a request.
Number 2, issue a command.
Yeah, this one at times is necessary and very appropriate, but this is more of a negative method because it takes your child's heart and your child's mind out of the equation. You tell them what to do instead of inviting them into the process.
Number 3, gentle physical manipulation.
Which in and of itself is kind of an interesting title, but we didn't come up with it. This is Gary. Talk to Gary about it. But this is done by placing a hand on the child's back or shoulder and directing them to where they should be going. This gets their feet moving, and sometimes that's all that's required is just a gentle nudge in the right direction. And when I say gentle, I mean gentle, not like a push.
Okay. Number 4, punishment.
Yeah, this can be a loss of a privilege like TV or an item like a phone, or This could be a task that they have to accomplish, like cleaning the room or cleaning the house. And the list could go on and on and on with what this could look like. But there's three main things that we want to talk about in regards to this method of punishment. We already talked about that Gary mentions this is the most negative method, but it still does have its place and it does have value. The first thing I want to talk about is kids have a very, very well developed sense of what is and isn't fair. So make sure that the punishment fits the crime. Too much and the child will become resentful because they can sense that it's excessive. Not enough and the child will learn not to take responsibility and not to respect your rules. Secondly, if your child shows genuine remorse for their actions, then you don't even need to punish them. Why, you may ask? Oh, because a normal conscience is formed by guilt. What you're seeing in this moment is the development of your child's conscience, and it should be celebrated. On the flip side, what punishment does in these moments is punishment wipes away guilt because it feels as if the wrongdoing has been paid for. Punishment at this time may inform your child's actions, but it does not inform their heart. Gary points out that punishment when a child already feels guilty can hinder the development of a healthy conscience. Thirdly, don't use your child's love language against them in punishment. For example, cutting and harsh words to a child whose primary love language is words of affirmation will hit home incredibly hard. It'll be incredibly damaging. It can create ruptures in their love tank, meaning when you're trying to pour in love, it just flows right back out again. Kids need to know that they are loved unconditionally by their parents, especially when it comes to discipline, because discipline is hard. Using their love language against them can be very destructive. So we want to encourage you, know your kids' love languages, pour in unconditional love to them all the time, and when it comes to discipline, don't use their love language against them.
Discipline is meant to look out for the interests of our kids and to help them grow, not to release frustrations with our kids, although we do it.
Sometimes.
So with that said, let's go back to the main question of the series and let's ask ourselves, does the way we are living make sense? As parents, let's look at how we discipline our children and see if it really makes sense. Are we training our children's hearts and minds, or are we just using it as a form of punishment?
Now, we're going to close this off here and move into time of discussion. Now, if you've been watching this video on YouTube or you're listening to the podcast, I want to encourage you to take these questions and write us your thoughts and let us know how we can pray for you as well. We want to invite you guys also to our next Parents' Night, which is going to be December 17th at 8 p.m. on Zoom. So it's going to be a good time. You see, Parents' Night is meant to be far more than just you guys watching a video of us talking. This is meant to be more of a conversation piece. And we do those conversations on our Parents' Night. So please plan to tune in next time, and we hope to see you there.
Bye.
Bye.